Welcome, parents and grandparents, and anybody else who takes care of children. This is The Owner's Manual, a podcast for parents. I'm your host, Drew Nash, coming to you from One-to-One Pediatrics in Danville, California. This is episode 111. I have put together a very interesting and informative show for you today. In today's episode, I will have an in-depth discussion with a certified medical exercise specialist. We will talk about how to encourage and get kids to be active from an early age, and also how to motivate the couch potato to get up and get moving. We will discuss creative strategies to make exercise fun, not for the kids who love sports, but for the ones who don't. So stay tuned for some super motivating tips and talk. In addition, we'll continue the segments Pediatric Fun Facts and Parenting Horror Stories. And at the end of the show, I'll answer some questions from listeners. For those of you who just happened upon the show accidentally, The Owner's Manual, a podcast for parents, is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other podcasting platforms. Since I'm trying to build our listener base, I'm calling on you, our fans, to help spread the word. Tell your friends, neighbors, your child's daycare provider, and anybody you know who might like listening how to find us. I hope you'll follow us on whatever platform you use to hear us so you can be notified when each new episode becomes available. In addition, we're on Facebook at The Owner's Manual Podcast and Twitter at Podcast for Parents, where you can like us, post a comment, post a question to be answered on the show, or even tell your pediatric horror story. If there's a topic you'd like to hear about, this is a terrific way to let us know. Also, I've started posting information, photos, and videos to add a visual component to some of our segments, so check it out. And now for the weekly disclaimer. While we hope that listeners are able to learn and benefit from the content of this show, the information discussed on the Owner's Manual is not intended to diagnose or treat any specific individual or condition. There is no substitute for direct patient care from a trained clinician. If you have concerns about your child, we recommend that you make an appointment with your child's primary care physician for an evaluation. Before we get to the main topic for the day, it's time for Pediatric Fun Facts. Each week, I bring you an interesting pediatric factoid or historical item that you probably didn't know and might not believe. I've got an endless supply of this stuff, and I think you'll find it interesting. So let's jump right in. Pediatric Fun Facts. Did you know that babies are born with the ability to walk? Yes, that is true. It's hardwired into their little brains from before birth. You've probably all seen videos of a baby giraffe or horse or deer being born. They pop right out of their mom and immediately stand up and take some steps. Well, babies have that little motor program in their noggins too. Unfortunately, they don't have the strength or balance to pull it off for about a year. But they instinctively can take steps. This is called the newborn step reflex. Now, unlike last week's fun fact, this definitely is something you can safely try at home with your newborn. Hold your baby up from behind with each of your hands under their armpits. Suspend them down so that their feet are dangling, and hold them up to the edge of a table or bed or some flat surface. Move them toward the table, and as their feet hit the edge of the table, they will start to make stepping movements. If you kind of lightly drag them across the surface, they will continue to take a few steps. This reflex is present at birth, but then fades after a few months, only to re-emerge around a year when a toddler starts to walk. Now, if you don't happen to have a fresh newborn available to see this with, I've posted some photos and videos on the Facebook page so you can see it for yourself. Check it out at The Owner's Manual Podcast. While there, you can like us, post a comment, a question, or an idea for a topic you'd like to hear about. So newborn babies can walk. I think that's incredible. What other crazy things can they do? Well, subscribe and keep listening, and I'll tell you. And that's our pediatric fun fact for the day. And now on to the show. Today's guest is a certified medical exercise specialist. She is a motivator and fitness expert and the CEO and programs director at Gumsaba Custom Fitness, Gumsaba Boot Camps, and Hit with Power. The list of her training and teaching credentials is extensive. She is Spartan S.G.X coach certified, and she is TRX Level 2 certified, to name a few. My guest is a second-degree Bakufudo black belt. She was also the Kyushu Kung Fu Full Contact National Champion in 2001, 2002, and 2009, as well as the Kyushu Kung Fu Full Contact World Champion in 2009. She is definitely not somebody you want to mess with, but is also one of the gentlest souls that I know. I'm also lucky enough to have her as a sister-in-law. So please welcome to the show, Coach Michelle Brown. So welcome to the show, Michelle. It's great to have you here, and thank you for taking time and showing me your gym. We're recording here from the gym, so if it's a little bit echoey for people listening, it's because we're in a gym.
Right, it's bouncing off all the iron in the gym.
Yes, and there's a lot of iron here. So we're here to talk about getting kids healthy and keeping them active, and developing lifestyles and activities that kids will enjoy for their health benefit, and also that parents and kids can do together. So let's start talking about that. So before we get into getting kids out of problems, let's talk about what kind of things you would think would be beneficial to do, parent-child activities, even when they're young, maybe even just barely walking, just to get them in the routine of doing more healthy things.
So kids that are 6 and under really should just play. You want to get them outside. You want to get them, dirty and uncomfortable. It's a good lesson for life. Climbing trees, all those traditional things that you think of when you think of playing, or maybe some of you think of playing. Those types of playthings can help them develop the interest in what they might like to do. So if a kid is playing after school, he's releasing stress from the school day. He's also manifesting a lot of what he learned, or she learns. And so during that time, that freestyle play is really important, at least up to 6. I am 44 and I still freestyle play, as you know.
I do know that. It's awesome.
I also want to say I don't have kids. And so my perspective is really interesting because I teach a lot of them, and a lot of people bring their kids to me to get them through that hump in life where maybe they're getting ready for high school and they're not quite feeling confident. They don't have a sport or a group of friends or at a new school. I've had a couple of those people come to me for that 13 to 14 time. I've had some 8-year-olds come to me that want to get faster at soccer, right? But whether they're an athlete or they want to be an athlete or they are somebody who needs to be active, one of the most important things is their interest, and developing that interest from a young age. If you're a parent, making yourself get up off the couch when you're a kid,
So observing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So seeing what they're into and then running with that.
Right.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah. And, it's easy kind of to be genuinely interested when your kid's really good at a sport.
Sure.
But when your kid is, whether your kid is good at a sport or not, it's important to help them recognize that failure that you do experience so much in sport is just like a good foundation for life.
Absolutely.
And if you try stuff and you love it and you're not good at it at first, but you love it, you're going to get better at it. And,
absolutely. And I think that some kids have a negative first response to things. So if they try something that they've never tried before and they don't do well, which is what you would expect as a parent, having that perspective, but they get frustrated and maybe don't want to do it again. So motivating them to continue.
Yes. This is one of the big reasons I tout martial arts, because a kid has to know a certain amount. I mean, and obviously it depends on the type of school and, the type of kid. It's not for everybody. But those types of systems where they have to try and maybe they don't make it and they have to try again and they have to change, to get to a certain level, whether that means martial arts or the parent doing more of that kind of tracking, can be really helpful. If a kid knows that when they come home, they're going to get a certain reward if they go play, that just like an adult is rewarded play behavior, but it does take involvement from the parent. And what you and I have talked about previously and are talking about now is really the parent being the example.
Well, it's a parent being an example as far as being active, but also a lot of times that reward is interacting with your parent doing this activity. And that's so to tell Billy to go play and to sit there on the couch and watch TV while you expect them to be active isn't one, realistic, two, isn't a good role and doesn't also provide that reward that they get to play with mom or dad and do this activity as they get better at it.
Right. And, as a kid enters into their teen years from those young, they start to kind of separate into those kids that are going to go for sport and those ones that have decided that they're not going to go for sport. And that time, just like I remember my parents, one time we did it, there was a reading assignment at school was to read with your family instead of do the TV. Mm-hmm. And this was in the 80s. So, 85, I think. And I'll never forget that hour. And it was something that never happened again. And it was intimidating to me too, because reading for an hour when I'm 9 years old was like, what?
A long time.
We watched Three's Company. Right.
Right. So instead, though, it was a very positive experience.
And that sharing interaction, I think sometimes, a lot of the time now, you see it get lost. The parents are involved in their phones, and that's hard for all of us. And just the example of that. And, I know I've taken care of plenty of nieces and nephews and had children close to me enough to know that there's sometimes you're just like, I will do anything to stop you from bothering me.
Yes.
I will give you this iPad and turn on that stupid thing.
And that's definitely a valid thing. However, that's not what we're talking about today. So,
right. But I also do, on the same note, that's a good use of it. Yeah. They shouldn't be able to do it all the time on their own.
Right.
It's a reward.
But using it as a focused time as opposed to all the time.
Right.
And that's come up in several of the previous podcasts as far as that machine that everyone has in their pocket.
We all have it.
And really just when you're trying to do something like this, just turning it off and having your kid turn it off and really just not having that as a distraction. It's hard to do, but once it's off, it's actually kind of a relief.
Right.
For everybody.
And absolutely. But back to getting kids active that might otherwise not play sports.
Yeah, because the kids who are athletic really aren't the kids that we're having to focus on today. Those kids are kind of on autopilot.
They are. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it's not autopilot. Sometimes it's the parents really wanting the kid to do it because it's their college resume.
That's true. But let's talk about the kids who tend not to be these sporty kids.
Yes, exactly. So the ones that tend not to be as sporty, they may not be as willing to spend the time that it takes to get better at something because they haven't yet felt that, oh, I'm good at this benefit, right? Or I feel strong at this, so I'm going to keep moving this dopamine through my body, essentially. Yes. Getting them active may be a little more strategic. So I actually did this with my husband. It's a really good strategy. It's a white lie. So I tell Chad when I want to run 8 miles that we're going to run 12. And he looks at me like, 12. And then I'm like, well, we'll just do 8. And now it's kind of a known unknown.
Yes. I do that with my wife when I tell her I bought something, and I usually tell her it cost $75, and then she gets mad, and I tell her it really only costs $40, and she's happy.
See? Yes. It's called reverse psychology.
But don't tell her. She never listens to this podcast, so she won't know.
But really on a more serious note, telling a kid, hey, let's do this for 5 minutes. 5 minutes in a kid's mind, if they're entertained, isn't that long. So if we're talking about 5 minutes, we're usually talking about like 10 or 15. Yeah. As long as there's not distractions, as long as they're enjoying it, they're not hating it, right? So it's not like they're doing something like going out and running. Maybe a kid really doesn't like to run, and there's a lot of kids that are uncomfortable running because of the way that their bodies feel when they run.
Yep.
And so maybe it's investing in a cheap stationary bike and being like, hey, you're going to do that for 5 minutes before you start your homework, right? Yep. You're going to eat your snack, and then you're going to start your homework, and then every 50 minutes you're going to get up for 5 minutes, 50, and you're going to do it again. And see how it goes, right?
And the research behind that, as far as what you just said, exercising before you do brain work, is really substantial. And a lot of schools have actually gone to the first thing that happens in the school day before they go into the classrooms is the entire school will run a lap or two.
Yep.
And my son's school did that in elementary school, and it was amazing. The first thing, the arrival bell rang, and they all lined up and ran a lap, and then they all went and learned. So taking that break to build that dopamine is and to then reestablish it every 50 minutes or so is great.
There's a book about it. It's called Spark. Have you heard of this? So
I don't know. Tell me.
It's really interesting. They did a study on kids that I think it was in Chicago, but I'm not sure. But they added in the first period was for everybody was going to be PE.
Yeah, I did hear about this.
So that's part of the book. But long story short, the hypothalamus of the brain is where the activity center is as far as neural connections of new things, right? New learning things. Mm-hmm. There's a protein that's released. It's simple science. It goes into the blood, and when you exercise, that protein is shown to be 32% higher. And so your body is able to circulate more information, right? So you're building new synapses and maintaining neuron connections.
So it's taking a brain vitamin by exercising before you go to try to learn something.
Right. And for kids, because, puberty, right? That's a big one. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And,
I say I don't have a lot of kids, but I feel like I do because I often see them at the same ages. They come in at about 13. They're not feeling secure. I'll teach them how to hit the bag. That's an incredible way to get an insecure kid to feel like they can control something that is inside of them a little bit better. Mm-hmm. They can manifest a little bit of what they're feeling and know that, it's okay to be angry as long as you do something about it. Anger and an emotion like that in exercise, there's they don't call it like runner's high for nothing. You're getting over stuff when you exercise.
Sure.
We all know it, but it's often the getting there because we haven't been rewarded enough for some reason, especially now because we like quick reward.
Yes.
It's
fun
tough.
Again.
Right.
Yeah.
And kids, so much of the time, if I don't know if you can tell, but I get really excited. I'm super positive, especially with kids, because there's just unlimited potential. It's like a well, you can just dig in there and be like, what's in here? It's so cool. And from kids I have that have low back stuff, we talked about this going on because of single-sided sport, or because of misuse of the body during single-sided sport, I should say, because not everybody has it. But to other kids who, like I said, are going into high school and feeling like they don't know where to start as far as who they are, they're not in a sport. Every kind of kid really loves to feel like they have positive feedback on what their body's doing. Like if I say, hey, you just nailed it, I can feel they're emotionally like, oh, I just got that right. I just connected that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a connection to a baseball. It can be a connection to your body when you're doing a pull-up and how that pull-up may manifest into a Spartan race in 5 years that kid loves doing and is a huge stress relief for them. And they associate that type of thing with the positive instead of with the, oh God, I got to get off the couch.
Right.
We all have those days.
Yeah, sure. But we're trying to get kids off the couch. So back to kind of where we started as far as activities to kind of pull out to do with your child to get them motivated, whether that's talking about a toddler or an older kid or even a teen who's maybe more independent. Things to suggest for parents to do?
Yes, I have a few of them. A cheap investment in some fun equipment is wise. So go to Play It Again Sports. See if they have a Bosu ball or any balance stuff.
What is a Bosu ball?
It's a half Swiss ball, like a half circle,
Yep.
half dome, and get fun games to balance on that. I do that with we keep one at my mother-in-law's house, and I do that with my niece because she tends to just run circles, this kid. And the parents let her crawl everywhere, but when we play, we play. I like to get her playing. I bought her a trampoline, a small one, but so balance games on the Bosu, it could be 5 minutes.
You put a board on top of that, or you
just put it the round side up and they step on it and try and balance on one leg. So that's a good one. If you do have a kid that likes to run, this is younger. I used to do this with Maya, Amy's daughter. I'd put cones out in front of the driveway. I'd block it off and I would time her for a 30-yard dash after school. And we'd do like 10 of them. And
most kids love that. Some kids don't, but most kids, if you set up a game and say, okay, we're going to see how you do. So just anything simple like that.
And if a kid didn't love to run, I'd have them speed walk it with their arms in a crazy shape and wear a cape. You know what I mean? Like you can make it so that they might feel like they can do it, but it doesn't have to be compared to anything,
But even kids who don't like to run will usually run 30 yards.
Yes, they will.
Just to
this
see how
is
their
true.
time
Or
is.
do it for
and you
5.
have a stopwatch out.
Yeah, that's what I used to do. And she loved it. She loved the game aspect of it and looked forward to it. Can we play running? Sure. So for me, she was a very energetic kid, and she did do Montessori. So she learned from a young age that play is part of life, you know? And so it was really important for her to have that extra time after to kind of just do her thing, you know? So another thing that I know I used to do as a kid was play ditch and or tag, you know, you'd all count and you'd run after each other. That was really fun. And we played that till we were 15. I know that probably sounds ridiculous to imagine your 15-year-old playing ditch, but it was really fun.
So just playing tag, talking about someone's
tag.
it. And,
someone's it. You close your eyes, you count to 100 and you have a parameter and you go try and find the person and tag them. You know, those old fashioned games, you know, I think that double Dutch jump rope, there's no greater investment for a young girl to get her a double Dutch jump rope. You know, it's just those fun games that you and I both associate with activity. It doesn't have to be that complex.
And this
you know?
actually doesn't plug into a USB port or anything?
Exactly.
It doesn't.
So going back to play it against sports like a medicine ball or even an empty ball, people will come into my gym and they'll have a kid with them. They're on a new interview and they don't have a place. And I just say, you know, bring your kid in. I have a red ball. And they love it. They can throw it anywhere. It doesn't break anything. I mean, in some houses or places it might, but it doesn't here. They could certainly do it outside, but it's really light. And it's just something for a kid to kind of move around and hit and throw, and you can bat at it and it goes and you run after it and grab it. For a young kid who's just learning how to walk and run, that's a great tool.
I mean, even just a balloon. Just blow it up. I mean, that'll keep a kid entertained for a good half hour.
Absolutely, yeah. And then, you know, one of the more complex things would be like setting up a little obstacle course. You know, if you have some space in your yard and, you know, I did this for my dog, but you could do it for a kid. Kids love obstacle courses. They'll, you know,
climbing through a box.
Exactly.
And then jumping over something. And
a kid will go hard. You want to get their heart rate up for a while. You want to get them panting and feeling out of breath. For many reasons, physically, but also for those brain connections and those judging risk connections where we say to ourselves silently without even knowing it every day, is this next step smart? Is there a curb there? Do I need to lift my leg? How far do I need to lift my leg? Because as we age, these things play out, you know, if you,
absolutely.
your hand, the dexterousness of just walking at first is a pretty huge thing.
So part of the benefit of an obstacle course would be knowing just how far you can jump or how high you can climb.
Or even for a little kid, like you were talking about getting a toddler to, you know, crawl through things, that type of thing where they learn to stand up, it just helps build resilience from a young age and teaches them that it's part of their day. It's not something separate. It's not something you choose, you lose if you don't use, you know? So, and I ride my bike as much as I can, even though I'm an adult and I feel sometimes insecure, like people think I don't have a car, because it's so rare that you see people commuting on their bikes.
We do live in California.
I know, we do. And everybody has a really nice car. And here I am on my bike. But you know what? Every single time I turn that wheel, I'm putting my joint through range of motion. It feels good. My mind is less stressed. Even the quarter-mile driving here can be very stressful. And it's not when you're on a bike or on your foot as much. You know, you might take a chance of getting hit crossing in front of Shell. But other than that, it's, you know, so finding those things that you're going to do and associating your trip to the grocery store with your bike. It seems far-fetched for a lot of people, but it doesn't have to happen all the time. And that's what you're teaching a kid when you go to your store on your bike with them, right? Or you ride to dinner together.
Yeah, they'd be like, Mommy, Daddy, is your car broken? No, we're just doing this because it's fun.
We're going to ride down to the Extreme Pizza at Alamo or whatever it is, and we're going to ride home together, you know? Why not? It's not, most people go out to dinner in Alamo and live in Alamo, and unless it's dark, it might not be safe, but that could be lunch too, just like our family meets in the same way. You know?
Sure. So. That's great. And as you get older kids, so we talked about obstacle courses for like toddlers. I doubt a lot of sixth graders would come home and maybe they would. Some would.
So I have this thing where if my client has a birthday, they can come in for a free workout. And it just so happened that everybody else had canceled on a day. This child is 13. He's now 15. Going into college or high school, and he was a very immature 13. He just would do goofy things in the gym and just was kind of grew really fast, and his mind wasn't quite cut up. And so his mom tasked me. She really wanted him to learn some grit. So I used to have obstacle courses for him. He'd have to army crawl across the floor. You know, he'd jump up on a box, and finally we got him to like a 24-inch box, which was huge. And I got him hitting the bag, and now he does martial arts in Berkeley. because he loved hitting the bag. And he had been in martial arts as a kid and felt like he just didn't fit in. And after just getting into that one thing and realizing, oh, I can hit the bag hard. Oh, I really can. He went back there and I saw him. He's just a different kid.
Yeah.
And it's the parents' involvement, the parents saying, okay, I'm not going to ignore this or say it's okay to lay on the ground and play video games today. I'm going to take you to Michelle, which may cost you money, right? But that's an investment that people are willing to make.
Oh, completely. I think if you could take a kid who tends toward inactivity and make them a kid who is enjoying being active and reaping those benefits, body image, but also just all the endorphins and brain chemistry changes, then I think most people would be willing to make that financial investment. Absolutely.
And, I was in researching a little bit for this, I was reading an article about how to deal with your jerk teen. Because of course, when I was looking into, some studies and one of the things I think, when you have a teen that is really misbehaving, if they're not active, that might be a big reason why.
Absolutely.
If they're not using their body and they're not feeling like they have something that they can control and move. And I know I go back to martial arts a lot, but it's a lot about taking your total control over your body and putting it in spaces where you didn't think it once could go, you know, and having a kid not have that connection it's stressful, especially when they have to go to school and then they have to run a mile, which,
then they hate it.
And they hate it.
Because they're not in shape and it's awful. And then there's the sporty kids who are zooming to the front and they're just lagging. Yep.
Right. And I love that a lot of schools are doing like badminton and stuff. And at first people will laugh, but you know what? Kids running around for an hour. So what? It's cheap equipment. Great. Nobody really gets tagged hard, I hope.
No, but patients love badminton. My patients tell me about it and they really enjoy that class. It's one of their favorite classes.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because
I love that.
It's pretty laid back, but they're interacting socially and they're interacting physically. And, you don't have to be a great badminton player to enjoy badminton.
Absolutely.
You can be pretty, beginner level and still have fun with it.
Right. And, I think when we were growing up, it was more of an association. There was a harder divide between people that did sports and people that were the smart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now it's like, it's cool to be smart, thankfully.
It is.
It's so cool.
It didn't used to be.
Right.
Yeah, because those are the people that go into computer science and
It's
successful.
Right. And it's cool to care about the planet. All those things are a little bit different than they were. Different priorities, I guess, in the 80s is what we'd say it. And so I love that kids don't want to feel like they have to associate with a sport, but by the same token, they also need to understand why it is so important to be able to use your body in a way that's going to help it last forever, right?
Absolutely.
They don't need to know the science behind it, but they need to feel that connection. So
I think sometimes that helps. I think
oh.
sometimes when kid is feeling blah on the couch, and if you can explain to them the biochemistry of why they feel that way, and you're just going to have to bear with me and do these things for a little while and see how you feel.
Right.
I think that fairly universally, they're going to feel better.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the science is out on that. I mean, there's no question that exercise could be easily prescribed before many things, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
As long as the situation is safe, right? Yeah. I just think that, whether they exercise or not, whether they are in sport or not, they can still find that connection. It's totally possible to find that, like, I am bettering myself for having done this. It's just the path is going to be maybe totally different.
So how to get that couch potato off the couch?
That
15-year-old who's just kind of resistant and defiant.
Right. Well, I would say the best tactic would be to bring in a professional, somebody that knows what they're doing, because they've heard it from you. And whether that professional is like, hey, I'm willing to invest in this, saying to your kid, I'm willing to invest in this. You can help me choose which is best, whether we're going to get you boxing, right? Kids like that. A lot of the time they like to hit stuff and it's good to let them hit it. Yep. So I think that's a really good way to handle that kind of aggression. And then, allowing them in some way to be part of the process, not saying you have to do this, but hey, I'm willing to invest in this if you are, and let's talk about what might be good for you, because we're not talking about you tomorrow and your phone and all that stuff. We're talking about your future.
Yeah.
And this is just as important as everything else. You
Sure.
know, most people know more about their cars than they do about their own bodies. We get
That is
one.
true.
It's true. I say it a lot, you know, and that's why going back to what you said, some kids do want to know.
Yeah.
I teach a myofascial release and kind of breathing class at Miramani once a week for their varsity football players. It's something they've been investing in for a long time. Since 2013, they brought me in to start doing it. And it's really amazing to see these kids all turn off their phones. And when I talk to them and teach them, and I'll say, okay, this is the part of the body that we're rolling right now. We're going to deal with this, you know, issue that many of you will have. Yeah. I'll have them come up to me afterwards and say, hey, do you think that could be connected to this? Or this shoulder hurts. What do I need to do? They're actually genuinely interested. And it's not always because of the information behind it, but I definitely think that they appreciate being respected enough to know that I'll talk to them like they understand their bodies.
Yeah, and there's
you
the
know?
physiology, and you can understand what's happening here.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a good amount of them appreciate it. And it's amazing how by the end of that class, after an hour of really discussing verbally and non-verbally about this time being inside time and not outside time, that is part of sports that there needs to be more of, that recovery, that visualization time. That breathing time,
not
where
just
you're
getting
not
on the field
stressed.
and practicing and football players smashing into each
It's
other.
a missing link.
The mental part of it and
Right.
the recovery part of it.
Right. And saying, hey, if you're tired, sleep. I'll tell them when they come in, if you're super tired, you know that you can take a nap right now. I'm not going to be offended, and nobody else here is too. Yeah. They need to recognize when they're tired, when they're being lazy, when they're not doing the things that they could do to make themselves more efficient or perform better in sport or what have you, you know? And that universal thing is popular with athletes, but it doesn't have to be athletes. I don't consider myself a Spartan athlete, but I consider myself an athlete. You know,
well, I consider you a Spartan athlete.
Well, I mean, I've done a few, and it is my focus right now, but it's not like my identity like it would be if I were a professional baseball player or even a high school baseball player. It's not as much my identity, but it is a thing that makes me more resilient. And though it is difficult, I have found the route to joy within every hard workout, because I know that is payment towards my future. Sure. I know that race will be more efficient and effective, and I'll be more, there's a better reason for me to train, right?
Now you're a grown up, so you can see cause and effect that are separated by significant distance in time.
Yes.
And sometimes teenagers don't think that linearly.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
It's more immediate. Why should I do this? You know, and by the same virtue, that's why teenagers will start smoking or vaping and doing things that they don't realize are long-term things. So how do you connect those dots for them? Talking, education? I mean, you're just going on about how...
it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah.
You know, really not giving up on a kid. I'll have times where certain kids will come in and they'll give me attitude, and I have to blatantly say, it doesn't matter how much attitude you're giving me. You're not going to change my state. It's changing your state. Yeah. Right. That we're, we need to deal with.
And I think it's a parenting strategy too. A lot of times kids will play off that they think they're going to make you upset or disappointed if they do or don't do something, and you're kind of reflecting back that this isn't about me. This isn't going to make or break my day. This is for you.
Right.
So
and they know it is.
You can not participate, or you can participate and give it your all, or what degree of it you want to do, but this is really going to only benefit one person, and that's you. Yeah,
and I do think the strategy of really standing strong on not allowing a kid to get certain things if they're not doing other things is from the very beginning really important. Yeah. When you take on a child that's 13 that has been allowed to, like that one child I had come in here was, and I called him a child at 13 in my head because he just didn't act like a 13-year-old. Yeah. He acted like I acted when I was 5, and he'd been allowed to do that, and I would just not allow it. And so that's why bringing in a professional, bringing in somebody, asking advice, people go to therapists. I think that's great. I think that's important to have an objective side that the kid doesn't feel has that preconceived knowledge or filter. But when a kid is not following the rules, they do not get certain things. And I think it's easy to say that as somebody who's not a parent.
Yeah.
Right.
It's easy to say it as a pediatrician to people. It's easy to say it to other parents. It's hard to follow through. But when you do,
right,
when you actually just assert yourself and set that limit universally, even though it may be a short-term period of discomfort,
right,
long-term it's going to reap benefits.
And there's a saying in martial arts that is that it's more important to be respected than to be liked.
Yes.
And it's nice to have both, is what my caveat is. But it is more important because as a parent, I think a lot of the time, and I have this as an aunt too, I ride that fine line of being their friend, so they'll tell me stuff. But I also have to be very careful because I will not allow them to not be on time for a job interview. I'll come down like a hammer if you are a minute late for that job interview. I got you, right? So it's hard to ride that line, but I always go back to that saying, if they're not respecting you, it doesn't matter if they like you.
But as a parent, if you're a reasonable person, you're not doing anything outside the bounds of what most people would consider acceptable parenting. If you insist on the respect, you're going to get the like and the love. It just happens. But you have to demand the respect, and yes,
right.
And that's really on the parent as far as expecting that, and you're not gonna get that from a kid unless you expect that.
Right, and it's easy to give up when there's a kid that's maybe taller than you,
Yep.
And they get big, and so from the very beginning. When those situations start to become visible, whether it's early on or whether it's, whether they start acting out at a certain age, the discipline of fitness becomes more important. They have got to, by the time they hit puberty, if they're a kid that's defiant, they have to be doing something physical. I would say every day, but studies show an hour, 5 days a week is good. But I would say it's more than likely if a kid is not active, that they need to exercise. If they're really being defiant and acting out, getting them to that point is going to be a matter of not giving in on certain things. Like
and calling in a professional.
Yeah, and calling in a professional saying you can't. And I mean, I know parents who've had to have a kid taken in the middle of the night and discipline like that.
Yep.
The kid is great now. It wasn't pretty, but this was a repeated effort. I mean, there are some situations where you're going to have to go all the way, but I'm saying with a kid, if you bring your kid into somebody like me who knows kids or somebody that works at any of these other places that really works with kids, you'll probably find that the kid responds a little bit better to doing things to them because they're trying to impress them. One, right? That's a human instinct.
Well, there's just things that sometimes are best done not by parents.
Right. And also their parent isn't judging them while they're doing it, which may be a little bit of the problem, right? That you're not doing enough, or
might be conscious, might be unconscious.
Absolutely.
I remember when I was 3 and my uncle taught me how to ski, because it's one of those things that when you're 3 and you fall down and your skis kept coming out of their bindings and you get frustrated. And I remember once I literally threw the skis at the bottom of the hill and just sort of walked away. And my uncle looked at me and my uncle loved me, but he was always a little more scary to me than my dad. And after I turned around and looked at him, I came back and picked up my skis and put them back on. So that never would have happened with my parents. I would have just...
And look at that memory,
I know.
Of all
I remember
the
it,
Oh, yeah.
A long time ago.
One of the earliest, right?
Yeah.
You made me think of something when... I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I'll think of it in a moment. It's okay.
So sometimes there's things that parents can't do as well as an outside person, whether that's a relative like you or a professional you just hire to come in and assert a routine.
Right. And that is a really good point. Habitual. There's various studies on this, but it takes several times repeating something to make it become a habit, depending on what the previous habit you're replacing is.
Yes.
And if you're trying to replace like video game time, doing it in pieces, like saying, okay, you can play your video games as long as you do this too.
After you've done this.
Yes, it has to be. And that's kind of an old school technique.
And don't let them do it before, because the second thing will never happen.
And start your negotiations really high. That's what I was going back to with Chad. Do the 12 miles and then they're stoked on 8, you know? And so when you're talking about exercise, if you want to play your video game for 10 minutes, you're going to have to do your exercise for an hour. And then, give them, don't say, okay, if you do 30 minutes of exercise, you can do 30 minutes of video games, because the bottom line is the exercise at first probably isn't going to be very vigorous. They're not going to be doing burpees, right? They're probably going to be going for a walk, which is great for their mind, and that's what they should do every day. So they're going to have to do it for longer to get the real benefits of it if they're not, you know. So if you can start to teach them, and this is going to require learning, and it's best with a professional. For example, what is a pound of fat worth versus a pound of muscle worth, and how do our bodies metabolize differently when we carry those differently, right? Yep. If a kid can learn about that, because they're usually not in school unless they really get into the subject, it gives them a different picture of, oh, you know, that croissant is worth 450 calories. I burn 200 calories on my walk. I'm not going to eat 2 croissants.
It's kind of like putting kids on an allowance and then having them purchase things and realize what things cost. I had to do this many chores. If they realized this is how much physical exercise I have to do to burn this many calories, because when they look at the croissant, they just think, oh, that tastes good and I'll enjoy that in the moment. Right. But they don't realize what the exchange is. And
you know, there's a time to eat the croissant, right?
Oh, absolutely. But you need to know what you're eating.
Right.
And what, just like there's time to buy a toy.
Right.
But you should have a sense of what that toy costs relative to the work you have to expend to
exactly. And in some ways it's like, well, it's just true that we have our products have evolved faster than our bodies. And, you know, so our bodies are not meant to have unlimited, you know, whatever it is, right? Because we had to work for those things so hard, and we'd save them and salt them and store them and all that stuff.
And it might be days
ration
in
them,
between meat. Yeah.
Right. So when we see that stuff, and then when we eat it, our bodies go through this crazy physiological response that makes us want more, because we couldn't get that according to evolution. We would get a quarter of that. So if a kid is trained to understand what that is, it's helpful to in the future to them.
Early on.
Right, early on.
Really just kind of having that dialogue early on, because kids will listen, especially if you repeat things.
Right.
And then they understand what you're talking about when you say that's not good for you.
Right. I mean, my dad was forceful with food, I'll just say that. So you couldn't walk by the kitchen without getting his latest sauce just shoved at you, you know, taste this. He did always cook at home. Most of the time there was always a home cooked meal, albeit very late. There was always vegetables, and I was always told to eat my vegetables first. Clearly he didn't know what that would do, because I've been vegan for 20 years. Yeah. So, but the point being, but the point being that even though he maybe scared us more into eating the vegetables, you know, he still did it. He still forced it on me. There were better ways to do it.
And we've talked about those in the other podcasts. But
right. There's far better ways to do it. First. Yes, but at the same time, he was making it a priority. And that's why I think it might have worked, because I always did think, oh gosh, I better eat my vegetables, you know? So point being that even from a young age, he always encouraged us to go outside. You know, all of my sisters and brother were all pretty active people. My mom also, vacations were pretty active. We would water ski. We would do, you know, go snow skiing. If we went to a destination, there would be an activity. And so planning a vacation, I think, around activity, making a bike ride one day, you know, having a day where you totally relax, you know, planning it so that those things are understood as part of, still when you're on vacation, you still move and enjoy, and it can actually be a reason to go climb a mountain. You know, a vacation can be an event can be the reason for vacation.
And just reflecting back, I think almost every story that I've heard from you or from Amy about your childhood relates to whether it's a vacation or it's some kind of an outdoor activity.
Absolutely.
I never hear stories about, you know, when we were watching this TV show. I hear stories about when we were water skiing or we were panning for gold or something like that involved physical activity and outdoor stuff. So
it may have almost killed us. I will say, at 6 years old on the side of Granite Chief with my dad in a full blizzard was risky in the same way, you know, he'd say things at dinner to force us to eat our food. Yes. However, it did give me a really good sense of what risks are wise and what, as did martial arts. You learn really quickly what risks to take and what risks to not take when somebody's trying to hit you. Yeah. But that's kind of like those events in life where you're like, well, I have two choices. I either press on or I stay here and fight out the blizzard, which is not what the human body's meant to do. Sure. In the same way, a kid makes that decision when they're out for a run and they are deciding whether to go up in the hills and whether to, think about where they're running, or they get lost, right? Which happens. It happens at cross country at Monte Vista quite a lot, I hear. But letting a kid take that risk and deciding whether or not they should, instead of, oh, he fell down, those types of things, I hear that a little too often. A kid falls and, and I get it.
Definite societal issue.
It is,
especially in this area.
Yeah, and even here when because I am a moving violation, I'm moving fast and things will come in the way and I just kind of mow over them sometimes, kind of like my sister.
Yes.
And so I'll trip and, Chad just, laughs it off, but people hear, and it's like, it's my normal, I don't recommend it for everyone, but I don't react like that to those situations because I take those risks often. Yeah. I'm not saying that's best for everybody, but that's a benefit of exercise. If you think you're going to walk in this world or go out in this world and not trip and have to stumble and catch yourself or fall. Yes. That's one of the benefits of early exercise. Yep. So going back to how you get a kid of any age to exercise, functional training, make it fun, a walk. Yeah.
And the early adoption of those activities. So you're setting examples early on, and then that just becomes the lifestyle for them long term, as you are the example of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Michelle, it has been wonderful talking to you about this. We've kind of rambled in different directions,
totally.
but I really love where we went with all this.
Great.
And I know that the listeners will get an earful of this and may have questions for you. So would you like to share with us how, if people want to hear more from you or come see you, or if they happen to have a teenager that needs help, how they might get your services? So how do we get a hold of you?
So I have a few websites, but the best way to get a hold of me would be the easiest one to remember, I think. So it's hitwithpower.com. That's actually my self-defense division of what I do. I also run a gym called Gumsaba, but that's a little harder to spell and remember.
Well, you could spell it for us.
GUMSABA.com. And I have an outdoor fitness program as well. So we've got a lot of stuff in this area. We support schools and parks, which is really cool. We've raised a bunch of money for them in the 10 years that we've been around. So
it's terrific. And thanks for talking to me. And the listeners, sorry about the echoes here, but we are literally in the gym here, and this has been great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And now let's take a brief break. When we return, we will hear this week's parenting horror story and also answer a question from a listener. And we're back. Before you proceed with the next segments, I want to remind all the listeners about our phone-in line, which has been set up for people to call in and leave voicemail questions to be answered on the show. In addition, if you'd like to contribute to our new segment, Parenting Horror Stories, you can also use this number. The call-in number is 925-732-6274. Call in with your question or horror story for the show. You can also contact us on Facebook at the Owner's Manual Podcast, where you can leave comments or post questions and stories or ideas for topics for the show. Whichever way you prefer, we can't wait to hear from you. This week, we are continuing our new segment, Parenting Horror Stories. I'm calling on parents to call in with a funny story or anecdote about funny or outrageous things that happen when trying to parent. It might be a story that describes your less than greatest parenting moment, or possibly just something funny or endearing that your child did. You don't have to identify yourself if you're embarrassed, or you can make up a funny pseudonym. So once again, here it is, Parenting Horror Stories.
Hi, Dr. Nash. This is Stephanie, and when I heard about your parenting horror stories, I knew I had to call in. A few years ago, when my very spirited son was 2 years old, we moved into our first house, which was located on a relatively busy street in the suburb of Denver, Colorado. And within the first week of us living there, I had a trip planned to go see my parents. Now, naturally, early morning of the flight, I was running late because I had a toddler with me, and I forgot something upstairs. So I told my son to stay near the front door with the suitcases, which was locked, by the way, while I ran upstairs to grab it. And I swear I was upstairs for only a minute when I came down and I saw the front door open with my son gone. And as we were in our new house, I didn't realize that the front door bolts became completely unlocked when he pulled the latch-style handle down. So, of course, naturally, when he opened the door and our dog ran out, he went to follow our dog and followed him through our front yard, pushed open a 25-pound wooden gate to get into the street. And when I ran out to find him, he was in the arms of a very nice man in scrubs. Traffic was stopped in both directions, and my son was just sitting there in the middle of the street with this man. So of course I apologized up and down and couldn't believe what had happened. I felt completely mortified. And then of course I was late from my flight due to this hiccup, but that's obviously all in details. So if you didn't think that the story could get any worse, it actually does. When I got home from our trip, wedged in the front door was a Child Protective Services card. Now, I immediately thought that everybody in the neighborhood knew what had happened, and word had spread all around, and I was so upset. I tried to leave messages on the Sunday when I got the card, and also on Monday, which, talk about agony, Monday was a holiday, only to hear from the social worker on Tuesday morning. And of course, being 5 months pregnant with our second son, as soon as I picked up the phone when she called, I was already in tears. Before she could even put in a word, I explained to her that I knew why she was calling and apologized over and over and explained the situation, only for her to politely ask me my name and tell me that she was looking for the family who lived at the house before us, who hadn't told her that they moved. Talk about a complete parenting nightmare.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Truly a parenting horror story. And now for this week's phone-in question.
Hi, my name is Monica, and I'm calling from Alamo, California. My question is, which supplements do you recommend for a teenager who has ADHD? And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for calling, Monica. That is a terrific question, and one that we discuss a lot in the office. When I evaluate a patient for ADHD, and sometimes even before we get there, I like to talk about interventions that might help reduce symptoms so we can decrease the potential need for prescription medications, or sometimes even eliminate that need altogether. For years, there have been anecdotal reports and more recently several well-designed controlled studies that show that omega-3 fatty acid supplementation with DHA and EPA significantly reduce symptoms of ADHD. This inherently makes sense, since these fatty acids are literally the building blocks of brain cells. So if you have a condition where part of the brain is not as mature as it should be, or is delayed in maturation, it makes sense that to give food to help with brain growth will help. In general, the ratio of EPA to DHA should be between 1.5 to 2 parts EPA to 1 part DHA. These can be sources from fish oil or krill oil, and there are even algae-based sources for families who are vegetarian or vegan. Now, part of the problem with giving omega-3 supplementation is that while it's well absorbed by the gut and into the bloodstream, very little of the substance makes it to the target area, the brain. There's a filter in our bodies called the blood-brain barrier that is very selective about what it lets through into our most vital and sensitive organ, the brain. So while you can give your kids regular fish oil or krill oil that you can buy at a drugstore, very little of that will actually get to the brain to do what we're talking about here. There are a few products that have solved this problem by attaching the EPA and DHA molecules to either phosphatidylcholine or phosphatidylserine. These two molecules, for those of you who were not biology majors, are components of all animal cell walls, and by tagging the omega-3s to either of them, the fatty acids get a free ride across that blood-brain barrier, and as a result have much higher levels in the brain where they can do the work. Other supplements to consider include the following. Iron. If your child is anemic, then the delivery of oxygen to the brain, and all the other tissues too, can be diminished. If your child is not anemic, then extra iron won't do much, but that's the kind of thing that your child's doctor can determine in the office. Also, vitamin D is something that I push a lot, and we've talked about it in several prior podcasts. While there isn't a study that I'm aware of associating low vitamin D with ADHD specifically, there are so many known problems associated with vitamin D deficiency, such as anxiety and depression, which can certainly worsen ADHD, that it seems logical to supplement with this important vitamin. The majority of children that I test for vitamin D in my office have low levels. I generally recommend about 1,000 IUs a day of vitamin D3 for toddlers and preschool-age children, and about 2,000 IUs a day for kids 5 and up. As I've mentioned before, I've never seen a child have a high vitamin D level, so I feel comfortable recommending this across the board. Other supplements that might help also are magnesium, which is considered a calming electrolyte as it relaxes smooth muscle and calms down the nervous system. There are several over-the-counter supplements that contain this to help with sleep. Some of the B vitamins have also been shown to be helpful with ADHD. Vitamin B2, also known as riboflavin, is a coenzyme in the metabolism of fatty acids. Vitamins B6 and B12 help in the synthesis of GABA, serotonin, and dopamine. L-methylfolate is a form of folic acid that's essential for neurotransmitter formation. So that's a pretty comprehensive list of things that I recommend putting a child on if they have a diagnosis of ADHD established, or even if concerns about the child's focus and attention develop and you're even thinking that there might be an issue. Because these sort of fatty acids and vitamin supplementations take about 4 to 6 weeks to work, the sooner they're started, the sooner you'll see some results. Now there's a product that I recommend for my patient that has all of these supplements together in one capsule. It's called Accentrate. It's a once-a-day capsule about the size of a Tic Tac. There's a version for smaller kids and one for kids or adults over 110 pounds called Accentrate 110. For kids who can't swallow pills, you can even poke a hole in the gel cap and squeeze the contents out onto some yogurt or something. I like things that have no potential for side effects or harm, and Accentrate is one of those things. Just to be clear, I have no affiliation with the product or the company, but I do think it's a good place to start if you think your child may have these kinds of focus and attention issues. You can find more information about this product and buy it at accentrate.com. I hope that answered your question and helps your child. And that's today's show. I'd really like to give a heartfelt thanks to Michelle Brown for taking the time to talk to us about motivating kids to get active and stay healthy. For many kids who love to move, play sports, and run around, this isn't a huge issue. But for the group of kids who don't tend toward those things, finding ways to get kids off the couch and outside their comfort zone is invaluable for parents, not just day to day, but long term to develop healthy lifestyle choices and activities. Making things fun to do is key here, and Michelle gave us lots of ideas for that, so thank you. Also, for parents who feel stuck in that rut of inactivity too, Michelle's boot camps and self-defense programs are top-notch, so check them out. So until next time, this is your host, Drew Nash, wishing you and your child good health and happy parenting. The opinions and beliefs expressed on the Owner's Manual are that of myself, Dr. Nash, and my guests, and do not necessarily represent those of sponsors or other governing boards. The Owner's Manual is recorded and produced at Neutron Sound, Danville, California. The content of the Owner's Manual is the intellectual property of Andrew L. Nash, MD, and 1-to-1 Pediatrics Incorporated. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved.